One. Yet, in spite of the fact that my response to communism was and is negative, and I consider it basically evil, there were points at which I found it challenging. With all of its false assumptions and evil methods, communism grew as a protest against the hardships of the underprivileged. Communism, in theory, emphasized a classless society and a concern for social justice, though the world knows from sad experience that in practice it created new classes and a new lexicon of injustice. The Christian ought always to be challenged by any protest against unfair treatment of the poor. So, as I introduce my colleagues, I want the audience out there to think about what I just read to you and guess who said those words. And now I would like to introduce to you my dear comrades in arms, Richard Grego and Arobinda Mahapatra, and welcome to Infinite Discoveries. Today's discussion is, if you haven't figured it out by now, on MLK, Martin Luther King Jr. And yes, that quote was from him, from his autobiography. As a matter of fact, I was reading directly from his book called The Autobiography of Martin Luther King Jr., edited by Claiborne Carlson. And it's a fascinating book, but I bet those words are hardly ever quoted during Martin Luther King Day. This week we had MLK Day, and I know this discussion is a little past that, but I think it's at the right time now that the fanfare is over and the festivities and celebrations are ended. We can have a more serious discussion about MLK and what he meant, at least to us here in this channel. So I'd like to open up the discussion with my friends. Aravinda, what do you know about MLK, and what are your thoughts on him and his movement?
Yeah, thank you, Miguel, and thank you for that nice quote in the beginning. One of my favorite quotes from MLK is, I think he said that the arc of moral universe bends, but it bends towards justice. So I think this is very important for our times because we live in a very challenging time, a lot of political polarization, conflict, violence, not only here, but all over the world. And I think the message of Martin Luther King Jr. is quite relevant, quite useful, because he believed that we can together fight injustice through peaceful means. I think that is quite important, that there is injustice, there is violence, there's conflict, but we can fight those, or we can address those through non-violent means. And I think in that context, I was thinking about his lecture when he got Nobel Prize in early 1960s. I don't remember the exact year. So he says that he acknowledges his contribution, his role in civil rights movement in America, but at the same time, he says that this is not something new, non-violence or peace. This is something very old. Ancient times, he was talking about Gandhi, who influenced him a lot. So, but I think, this is the time today. I think this is quite a opportune moment that we need to talk about him, but also how to address the problems in our society by applying his ideas, his methods.
And Rich?
Yeah, I mean, along with what Arobinda just said, and what your and sort of the thoughts that your initial quote evoke, I think, first of all, I don't know if people usually think about this, but when you look at all the national holidays we have and the people we celebrate as our, sort of patriotic and national icons that represent everything that our country, the United States, and its history are supposed to stand for. For my money, Martin Luther King is the most deserving, perhaps, of a holiday and of veneration as one of our true American heroes. We used to have, when we were growing up, I know probably Miguel and I, now we just have President's Day, right? But we had Washington's birthday and Lincoln's birthday, and then we had Columbus Day. But I mean, even among those founding fathers and great patriarchs of our civilization, I think certainly Martin Luther King's example is, if there is any, in terms of the holidays we have and people we celebrate, his example is the one that's probably most deserving of celebration. And then also in regard to what you were saying, Miguel, and how most people never heard that side of him, or generally, right? That's not what we generally celebrate when we're giving him public acclaim. I think there's so many themes that he touched on outside, above and beyond, racial equality and social justice in that sense, that we don't think about, but he had a tremendous influence on, like social and political order as a spiritual one, that idea, the notion that a good society and a healthy society is not just sort of a matter of some technocratic public policy that you give people enough and make the trains run on time, that you're going to then, that peace and respect and social justice is just going to sort of arise, but that you have to have peace and love and compassion first as spiritual values, and then social justice will arise, as opposed to the other way around. And then beyond that, I think maybe, another thing to keep in mind is I think his ideas are probably more timely than ever on so many themes, one of which is that, the need to extend our love and concern and care, at the very least, our toleration and respect as a society and a community to people with whom we disagree, maybe strongly, maybe whom we find offensive, because that's where the real test of a spiritually healthy society is. It's not in celebrating free speech and respect for people who agree with you, right? It's when those, when you have people who really offend you and you don't like, that test your patience and test your tolerance and extend love and respect in regard to them. That is a sign of a healthy, democratic, free society. And maybe, and then I'll stop talking after this. In closing, I just say, along those lines, I would say, in terms of how timely and relevant this is, if you look recently at the divisive nature of our politics and our social, to some extent, the social issues that have risen to prominence now, regarding things like race and social justice, where, on one side, on the right, again, you have in our own, where we live here in Florida, our own governor has again, not saying these are wrong or right, but I mean, has raised these controversial issues about whether we should censor or ban or in some sense scrutinize groups that we mistrust because they say things that we don't like, namely, things like critical race theory that the right is distrusts in our schools. And then on the other side, really, on the left, right, we have this incident in Hamlin. Is that how it's pronounced? Hamlin College in where is it? In Chicago. You guys familiar with this? Where you had this instance where really a art history teacher wanted as part of her art history course included pictures of Muhammad in her lesson. Told students in advance that she knows that there's this sort of issue of reverence for Muhammad that prevents some Muslims from looking at pictures of Muhammad because those pictures are offensive, and students who might be Muslim the opportunity to not participate in class. But she showed the pictures, and the left administration of that college fired her for doing that. To which, of course, again, great controversy among the intellectual community of the college, both Christian and Muslim, and because of the issue of academic freedom, of not tolerating something that's offensive to some people. So I don't know. I don't know what Martin Luther King would take. I know what Martin Luther would probably say, but not Martin. But I don't know what stand Martin Luther King would be specifically on those issues. But I think always he did in favor of being tolerant and respectful and compassionate toward those people who disagree with you, at least listening. So that's something that I think we should keep in mind.
Yeah, I think just to add to Rich, I think one of the key contributions of Martin Luther King to American society in particular is he's one of the first leaders to talk about nonviolence. Because if you look at American society, particularly the tradition of materialistic, rationalistic tradition, like you hit me, I hit you kind of thing, you kill me, I kill you, that kind of approach. And it wasn't easy for him to bring that whole concept of nonviolence, nonviolent social practice to the community, to the people. So I think that is one of the very important things, and I think we need to think about that. Because now if you look at the political development, that not very sanguine, not very positive, perhaps. So we need to, I think we need to revisit the ideas of Martin Luther King, his activities, particularly his marches on the bridge. What is the protest bridge in Selma? Like when they're all sitting on the bridge without reacting to the police. So I think we need to bring those kind of culture of nonviolence, culture of peace to our society.
Can I ask you guys a quick question along those lines? Along the lines of his message of peace and nonviolence, what do you think perhaps might be his stance then in regard to policy in Ukraine, our policy toward Ukraine, and maybe even theirs? Would he, the arguments sort of on each side, or that, the pragmatic realist argument to some extent at this point, right, is that, well, if we don't take a stand and support the war and perpetuate the war, as long as it needs to be perpetuated against Russia, it's just going to perpetuate other actions like this from them, and we'll have more wars. And then, but on the other hand, there is the notion that the longer we do this, the longer we're perpetuating war, and people are dying. So I just wonder, what do you think his stance toward that would be? Which side of that equation? What would his reasoning toward that situation be? Would he be a realist in that sense? In that case?
Again, you would like to attempt, or I can't do that.
Well, that's a difficult question. When he was alive, of course, he was definitely against the Vietnam War. But in hindsight, in historical hindsight, of course, many people would agree with him today that Vietnam was a mistake. But he did not speak in the times of World War II. He wasn't popular in the times of World War II, when fascism was about to take over the world, if you will. And there's another rise now in fascism, I think, or at least authoritarian governments. And I don't believe neither Gandhi nor King dealt with those types of governments.
Gandhi did, didn't he?
Traditionally, England.
Well, he dealt with the issue of World War II and India's involvement, I guess, right?
Well, yeah, in that respect. I mean, with regard to overthrowing the British government, the British government would not be considered a tyranny. I guess by a lot of political scientists, right? It was, or it is a monarchy. It wasn't always the best monarchy, right? Did a lot of bad, but it had a tradition of democracy. Since the Magna Carta, it had a type of tradition of
within Britain,
you know,
Miguel, within the Britain, they had
yeah,
democratic culture, but outside they
Yeah.
had no democracy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, they weren't big Democrats in India.
Yeah.
I guess.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. No, but again, there's I think what I'm trying to say is there's like a restraint. I think there was a restraint that they could have gone further. Fascists and really harsh authoritarians have no limits. Stalin probably, Mao wouldn't have thought twice about eliminating millions of, and they didn't,
Yeah.
of their own people,
Yeah.
right? And I don't think that's so true in England. I mean, when they did do massacres, there were repercussions even back home. Like, why did you do that? And it was all over the world and all over the news. And the government, at least some members in the government, took pause in that. But when you have a dictatorship, they don't really care what you think as much,
Yeah.
I mean, that's just my view. Martin Luther King did not have the government that we have today. He dealt with a Congress that, and I'm going on a limb here, but it was a little friendlier. He had a more supportive presidency, executive branch that was on the side with the Johnson administration, and Congress as a whole. Today, look at Congress today. Do you think Congress today would really support the changes that Martin Luther King wanted to do? Wanted it back in the 60s. As a matter of fact, they're trying to roll back these changes. So again, it's hard to say what his view would be on the Ukraine, but he was a pragmatic. So
my take will be so his approach will be more Gandhian, because for Gandhi and for King, war is immoral, war is evil. So again, we don't know exactly, like we both said, we don't know exactly if he was alive, what could have been his stand. But I think the first thing he'll do, he'll say, hey, stop the war, stop the killing. He'll tell the same thing, both Russia, particularly Russia, because Russia started the war, and Ukraine, stop killing. Okay, because there is an inner conviction on his part that war and violence don't provide a solution to the conflict, because one has to address the root causes, the causes which we don't see now, not material causes, but identity, culture, race, ethnicity. So probably he would say, hey, go to deeper of the conflict, deeper aspects, and talk about that to the dialogue. Like he was doing dialogue all the time. Like when he was doing the civil rights movement, he was talking.
Yeah.
He was talking to the president, talking to the leaders all the time. So he will say, hey, do the dialogue and find a solution. But the first thing will be, don't kill the people, because that doesn't help. And if you look at, and that is really happening that. If you look at the war for the past about 1 year, from the last February till now, people are dying, right? Thousands of people are dying. So I think so Martin Luther King will say, stop the war, stop the killing, go to the negotiating table, talk to each other, and try to have an empathetic perspective of other sides' viewpoint. Right? Look at all the sides, all perspectives. Keep that in mind, and try to arrive at a solution. I think that would be his position, but I don't know exactly.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, would the world listen today though to him? And maybe they would, because I don't think we have the moral authority, the figures of moral authority that we had back then. And it takes somebody of that caliber for the world to listen to. But right now, nobody's listening to, because there are people that have been saying stop the war, come to the negotiation table, but they did not have or do not have the moral authority that Martin
Yeah,
Luther King had.
yeah. In that case, Miguel, in that case, his answer would be okay. Then kill each other because that's what is going on now, right? They're not
Right.
listening to wise
Yeah.
advice. And in that context, I remember the famous saying of Albert Einstein that if third world war happens, I don't know what will happen, but if a fourth world war happens, people will fight with sticks and stones. So Martin Luther King would say, hey, okay, you don't listen, then kill each other. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, that is happening, but counterintuitively, that brings to us the importance of his ideas.
Mhm.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, I going a little over time, but I would like to conclude that Martin King also, when we see the celebrations every year, is the emphasis on I have a dream speech and the idealism. And we tend to put him in a box of that idealism and rose-colored glasses, but he was much more complex than that.
Mm.
He was, I think, a very pragmatic person. He did recognize there was evil in this world, and he would say what we tend to say in the Christian world, that he was a man that had a prophetic voice, and prophets rarely are optimistic, and you should pretty
Mm.
much tell.
Mm.
Now, if you read, in the Bible, Old and New Testaments, there it's about doom and gloom a lot of times. Or if you do not adhere what I'm telling you, then this will happen. This bad thing will happen to you. And to paraphrase him, he said something like, "We'll all live uh, together as one people, or die as fools." So it's either, if we do the right things, it'll be good, it'll be fine. But if we don't, then there's going to be tragic devastation and tragedy happening. And we talked about Niebuhr.
May I have one sentence, Miguel? Just one sentence.
Yeah, go ahead.
So in that context, like, so there's a choice we have to make. Everybody has to make. And
Right.
there's a famous saying, "This is the inner war without escape." So we all have to make choices.
Exactly. That is absolutely true. It's up to, and collectively, it's also a choice, right? As a society, we have to come to a point in time where we have to decide if we're going to live as a functional civilization, or die as fools, as Martin Luther King said. And I know Rich was talking about Reinhold Niebuhr and King's study of Reinhold, and they actually met together, and they met, and Reinhold actually said that he would have marched in the protest, but he was already, too, I guess, old and ill at the time to do that. But this is another quote I want to end with, that is also from Martin Luther King, and he said, the elements in Reinhold Niebuhr's thinking helped me to recognize the illusions of a superficial optimism concerning human nature and the dangers of a false idealism. While I still believed in man's potential for good, Niebuhr made me realize his potential for evil as well. Moreover, Niebuhr helped me to recognize the complexity of man's social involvement and the glaring reality of collective evil. So, as you said, Rich, with these extremes on the far right and the far left, we can see, as an example of these collective evils, um, shutting down free speech, if you will, and ideas, and these are the dangers that I believe King was warning us about. The same thing when I opened up with the quote on communism. King was not saying he was a communist. He clearly said he believed that it was evil, but to his genius and credit, he parsed the bad from the good.
Mm.
He studied it. It's
Mm.
nuanced,
Yeah.
and that's what we need to approach everything we read. You know, that we can't just burn a book because we don't like the cover. We need to read in the pages and discern for ourselves what's good about it, what's bad about it. And I think that's the basics of democracy as well, that we can disagree, but we can disagree civilly, you know. So that's where I end my discussion on MLK. Any final thoughts?
Sounds like a great conclusion to me.
Yeah, absolutely. We agree to disagree. That is what
That's,
is
that's
democracy about.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the foundation of democracy, so that we don't you know, punch each other and throw blows at each other. That there was something that took the place of assassinations and wars in kingdoms and empires in the past, and that was the birth of modern democracies, where we have our differences through the vote, you know, and civic and civil discussions and debates.
Yep.
So, folks, I want to thank my esteemed colleagues, Rich Grego, Arubinda Mahapatra, both professors, and my name is Miguel Rodriguez. You've been watching Infinite Discoveries. So please click subscribe and like, share as well, and visit our website at infinitediscoveries.org. Until next time, take care.